Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. So over the past month or so, I've been posting a few videos about my personal favourite show of all time, Avatar: The Last Airbender. Specifically deep dives into what I see as two of Book 1 Water's best episodes, The Storm and The Deserter. And I just have to say, once again, how amazing it's been to see the ongoing love those videos are getting. Yes, the views and new subscribers, of course, but I'm specifically referring to the discussions that go on in the comment sections. I can't really describe how heartening it feels to talk about something that means so much to me personally, and to be able to share and engage in that love and passion and analysis with other human beings all across the world. I don't know man, it's just a very wholesome experience, and it helps that the conversations themselves are so thoughtful and interesting, and exactly the kind of discussion a show like this deserves. So what I thought I'd do is make another installment of the Cozy Comments show, where I essentially dive back into the comment sections of my videos, react to what people have to say, and generally just keep the discussions going. Because like I've said before on this channel, talking about this show in particular with other people is one of my favourite things to do. Of course, I'd recommend checking out the two videos first if you haven't already, just for a bit of context, but with that out of the way, let's get right into it. I'll be reacting to the Storm comments in this video before covering the Deserter comments in the next installment. I actually like that Aang doesn't get treated with resentment early on. We needed time to see him enjoy the title, and the Storm gives a good depth of the responsibility behind that title, plus the context behind why Aang didn't want to be the Avatar. Yep, I completely agree. I think it's important that early on we get to see Aang enjoying the title of Avatar, or at least not being weighed down by resentment from others straight away. It gives us time to connect with him as this hopeful, good-natured kid before the full weight of his role starts to hit. And I actually think that's part of what makes Aang such an underappreciated and often underrated protagonist. People sometimes overlook just how layered he is, because so much of his trauma and guilt is masked in those early episodes by that outward sense of fun and playfulness. And that's authentic. He's a 12-year-old boy who also happens to be a monk. Of course he's going to find joy where he can, or lean into childish enjoyment at times, because that's part of how he copes. The Storm is so powerful because it's where those glimpses of his deeper struggle, which are hinted at before, really come to the surface. We finally see the complexity behind his reluctance to be the Avatar, and how much he's been carrying beneath that cheerful, carefree exterior. I first watched it in my young 20s, and for me the moment I started paying attention and felt like the show was getting deeper than I expected was when Zuko as the Blue Spirit frees Aang, and Aang asks him if they had known each other before the war, would they have been friends. There was something in that exchange that made me realise the characters and the story weren't going to be black and white. I completely agree, that moment at the end of the Blue Spirit is definitely a turning point, but for me what really makes that moment land as hard as it does is the fact that it comes right after the Storm. I almost think of those two episodes as a kind of double bill. The Storm gives us that rich, layered insight into Aang and Zuko's pasts, into their guilt, their trauma, their conflicting duties, and then the Blue Spirit immediately picks up on that groundwork and pushes their dynamic into new territory, asking whether they could ever be friends, or at least fight on the same side. We even get that brilliantly quiet and understated ending where Zuko looks upon the Fire Nation emblem in his bedroom. Yes, I'm not sure if this episode would have hit as hard without the Storm, but at the end of the day, these really are episodes that shine in different ways, as is always the case with great double bills. Remember, the Blue Spirit also gives us some of the best action choreography of Book 1, however, I cannot defend that whole side plot with Momo trying to get to water for Sokka and Katara, which is just classic Book 1 fluff. Charming, for sure, but let's face it, you would never see this in The Storm or any other of Avatar's best episodes. Just wish we had gotten all 4 books. So this is a sentiment you sporadically still see in online Avatar communities, that there was originally going to be a 4th season of the show, perhaps titled Book 4 Air. However, it ended up getting canned, or whatever, because of the M. Night Shyamalan movie. Now obviously I can't say for certainty that this isn't in the least bit true, considering I didn't work for Nickelodeon during the late noughties, but from the research I have conducted over the years, this is basically confirmed to be a myth. Yes, head writer Aaron Eharz did apparently at one point want to go for a 4th season, but this idea was vetoed by Michael Dante DiMartino and Brian Konietzko, and all 3 of them have been on record stating that Avatar was always meant to be just 3 seasons of around 60 episodes. And when you watch the show, that's pretty obviously the case. It's just built with such a classic 3-act structure in mind. Book 1 Water functions as the setup, introducing the world, the war, and the characters. Book 2 Earth is, to lazily put it, the Empire Strikes Back of the series. It's all about escalation, everything grows darker and more complex, and the stakes really begin to rise. And Book 3 Fire is the resolution, delivering catharsis, character payoffs, and the conclusion to this arc of history. Adding a 4th season would have risked completely throwing off that perfectly built rhythm. Structurally, you'd be trying to tack on a new act after the resolution, but that's always going to end up feeling anticlimactic because, well, you've already released all the dramatic tension the story was building towards. So yeah, a 4th season wouldn't have worked, not without fundamentally altering that balance and risking what made the show special in the first place. Also, in my opinion, you really want that thing British shows tend to do quite well, which is to leave the audience wanting more. The fact that people still sometimes bring up this idea of a mythical 4th season really just speaks to how good Avatar is. It's a testament to how they left us all wanting more, but I don't think it really holds any historical or artistic weight. And I think it's often just used as a punching bag for M. Night Shyamalan and the bizarre relationship many Avatar fans have with the guy. Can we please put this show in HD? The black bar's gotta go, and that's all I ask for. The show is perfect. I can understand this comment. It really reminds me of the debate Rob McElhenney and Charlie Day had on the now defunct It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia podcast, where they were basically discussing whether their show should have kept its gritty, standard definition 4:3 ratio look, or whether they were right to upgrade to widescreen high definition and get way better equipment and lighting to make the thing look more clean and professional. Now, in my opinion, it really depends on both the media you're consuming and the type of person you are. For example, when it comes to It's Always Sunny, I actually completely agree with Charlie that it should have kept the look of the first 5 seasons. Sometimes that nostalgic, gritty feel can be rather fitting. The Simpsons is another classic example of this. Give me that grainy 90s look every day of the week and twice on a Sunday, over the smooth, polished feel it has nowadays. However, I wouldn't ever want to watch Lawrence of Arabia or Avatar, the Blue People Avatar that is, on a small TV in 480 pixels, because of course not. When it comes to Avatar The Last Airbender, personally I wouldn't mind if they never remastered it. I am someone who enjoys watching stuff in their original presentation. I think that's important. It's why I'll always watch the despecialized editions of the original Star Wars trilogy over the monstrosities that are the special editions, but I'm not so married to the noughties quality of Avatar The Last Airbender that I wouldn't watch some remastered version of the show in 4K or something. That would actually be really cool to see. However, what I cannot relate to is this hatred of black bars. Media having different aspect ratios honestly just doesn't bother me in the slightest. In fact, I actually quite like black bars. Again, it brings this retro feel which I really enjoy. I especially like it when films and TV shows change up their aspect ratio. It's something Wes Anderson is really good at doing. But second, and more importantly, if you're removing the black bars of Avatar, you either have to zoom into each frame, removing parts of the show which is an obvious no-go, or add more to the sides. And sure, that can look cool in isolated clips, and I've seen people do it online. It's very impressive. But at that point, you're fundamentally altering the original composition of the show. Think about it, the framing of each shot was carefully designed with that original aspect ratio in mind. If you start adding extra information at the sides, those edges are surely just going to feel like noise. They're going to feel artificial, disconnected from the focused, purposeful compositions that Avatar is so good at. It would completely mess with the balance of each frame, and I think it would pull you out of the viewing experience. That's just my opinion though. I am a bit of a nostalgia merchant, so let me know what you think in the comments. I disagree. The Great Divide gives a valuable lesson too. It shows how silly most of the reasons we as humans fight and form groups. With a little bit of understanding and forgiveness, you find that the world really is all connected, no matter how different/divided it may seem. I was actually so surprised to see multiple comments like this one defending The Great Divide, the episode which immediately immediately precedes the storm and which is commonly referred to as the single weakest episode of the series. But look, if you enjoy The Great Divide and get wisdom from it, honestly, fair play, more power to you. Like, I personally don't really relate to this comment and would argue that most other episodes of the show deliver that specific lesson much better than The Great Divide, but of course, it's not some dreadful piece of art or anything. It's mostly disliked due to how fillery it is in the grand scheme of things and how often it was played on Nickelodeon back in the day, because it is such a one-off episode. I vehemently... Is that how you pronounce that word? I rarely say this word out loud. I vehemently disagree about the majority's opinion that The Great Divide was the worst episode of Avatar. It was the worst episode in the first season, but Avatar Day is the worst episode in the whole series. So I decided to pair this comment with the last one for obvious reasons. Here we have a more traditional take on The Great Divide, but also the claim that Avatar Day is the true worst episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender, and personally, this is not an opinion I can get behind. Yes, Avatar Day is similar to The Great Divide in terms of it being this more fillery, standalone side quest that doesn't really offer much plot while also preceding episodes that are straight up some of the show's best. I will also concede that while Book 2 Earth is a step up from Book 1 Water in basically every way, including its more fillery episodes, Avatar Day is the one exception to this rule, and actually feels like it belongs in that first season. However, while Avatar Day is not exactly the best thing ever made, I'd actually argue it's the worst episode of Book 2, I still think it's superior to something like The Great Divide, simply due to it being far more entertaining. Like, need I remind you, this is the episode where Sokka plays detective, leading to some genuinely hilarious moments.
Look at the shadows.
They point east, so the sun must have been in the west.
So what?
I also love Aang talking to the other prisoners. It's that classic subversive Avatar humour. My mind immediately goes to the bit when Aang reveals that he doesn't need to be in that, like, wooden thing. It's just good. And overall, the 3-act structure of this story, with Aang fulfilling his community service by saving the village, it's a lot tighter than something like The Great Divide, or even some of Book 1's other more forgettable episodes. Also, this is the episode where Zuko realizes he has to split from Uncle Iroh, so I really don't think you can call it the worst episode of the entire show. Like, please tell me what The Great Divide does better than Avatar Day. The only great addition in the live-action version is that it is revealed that the crew Zuko is traveling with is the one he saved by speaking up at the meeting. Yes, I was really not a fan of the live-action version we got last year for a myriad of reasons, but credit where credit is due. This added piece of lore is kind of genius. I'm sure if the original creators ever actually watched Netflix's Avatar, they were kicking themselves for not including that in the original. I guess it can be headcanon or something. Although some may discredit the humour in Avatar as childish or immature, I feel it's quite the opposite. Some of the dialogue, transitions, and abrupt changes in scenarios make for a lot of intellectual humour. Think, he is a master of evasive manoeuvring. There is also generous amounts of slapstick that is downright hilarious, making for memorable and iconic dialogue. It's the quenchiest. I rest my case. I completely agree that the humour of Avatar: The Last Airbender is pretty consistently great. There are countless lines of dialogue I continue to quote to this day, a few just off the top of my head being, "I am a fan of secret rivers," and "I do believe in the power of stuff," and "What? I'm saying I'd rather kiss you than die. That's a compliment." But just as important, I think, is the balance of knowing when to use humour and when not to. Like, don't get me wrong, the show still can at times lean into unnecessary, well, that just happened, bathos, the worst example being the scene in Sozin's Comet after Fire Lord Ozai has been defeated. That's actually like my least favourite moment in the entire show. But this is pretty rare, and overall I do think Avatar has a really solid and balanced sense of humour, which has clearly stood the test of time. When I was discussing the somewhat childish and immature feel that most of Avatar's early pre-The Storm episodes have, I was referring less to the humour and more to the overall vibe. An episode like The King of Omashu, for example, for sure has some funny, iconic moments. I mean, Lettuce Leaf? Come on. But there's this very classic Nickelodeon feel which pervades throughout the entire thing. The stakes are just so light and fluffy that it feels like it's taking place in a far more juvenile show altogether, compared to episodes such as The Storm and The Deserter, and basically every episode of books 2 and 3. Now, that's not to say there aren't serious episodes before The Storm. The Southern Air Temple in particular comes to mind, but I do think that The Storm marks a clear shift into slightly more serious, emotionally complex territory. And along with that, I'd say the humour itself matures too, especially once we get to the second book, where overall I think the writing becomes far tighter in all departments across the board. Don't forget that Zuko's pursuit of the Avatar was meant not only as justification for Ozai to send him away for not being heartless, if you've read the comics of Zuko's youth, but also be a wild goose chase across the Earth, because the Avatar that time hadn't been seen for just under a century, thus meaning Ozai literally sent Zuko away to die. Yeah, I mean, look, I've read a few of the Avatar comics, but not the one you're talking about, which I assume is The Search. Never got around to that. However, I did always presume that Ozai's banishment of Zuko and the whole mission to find the Avatar thing was a multi-layered operation, if you will, a bit of 4D chess from the Fire Lord. Now, don't get me wrong, I think part of Ozai's thinking here was simply, I don't respect my son and I don't want him to be my heir, but I can't outright kill him. However, I can banish him on a technicality and send him on some long, arduous fool's errand to find something that probably doesn't even exist. Kind of like sending your son away to hunt down Bigfoot or whatever. It'll keep him busy and out of the way forever, hopefully, and I can continue with my warmongering without all the interpersonal family drama and war room embarrassment. But also, if you look at it through Ozai's twisted, fascist, worst parent of the year mind, Zuko's banishment is kind of a win-win for both himself and the nation as a whole. I mean, there's basically two outcomes of him banishing Zuko, right? Either he never has to see his disappointment of a son again, and firebending prodigy golden child Azula can become his heir, or Zuko somehow returns to the capital with a captured Avatar, simultaneously proving his worth and removing the Fire Nation's single biggest threat. And while I don't believe Ozai ever really thought his 16-year-old son was going to capture this all-powerful mythical being no one has seen in a century, I do think it has to be noted that when he believes Zuko did actually kill the Avatar at the end of Book 2, he welcomes him back into the family with seemingly open arms. I mean, we can debate on how sincere Ozai is when it comes to his relationship with Zuko in the first half of Book 3, but I would say it's relatively sincere. Like, I'm pretty sure Ozai did accept Zuko back as his son, and possibly even his heir again, once he was led to believe that his son actually fulfilled his mission and quote-unquote regained his honor, which shows that the banishment was not a complete goose chase, and that there was always a chance of actual quote-unquote redemption. But we also have to keep in mind that when Zuko does eventually stand up to Ozai in that incredible scene during the invasion, revealing that he didn't kill the Avatar and that Aang is probably still alive, the Fire Lord doesn't act too surprised or heartbroken, so maybe he had his doubts all along. We don't really know for sure, but what I will say is that I do think Fire Lord Ozai is a far more interesting and layered antagonist than most Avatar fans give him credit for, and that is something I'll be talking about much more when I get around to doing my review/ranking of Book 3 Fire. In fact, I might even dedicate an entire video to him, we'll just have to wait and see. It's interesting you didn't see Jet as a profound piece to me. I saw it as an extreme juxtaposition of the roles the war forced upon young adults and children, and the roles we naturally assume they should be in, things that many of us experience or see in other media. I always saw it as the transition, where we see the lightheartedness of youth and young love, but how everything is elevated, a life and death scenario. So, similar to The Great Divide, Jet was another episode that lots of people went to defend in the comment section, and while I do stand by The Great Divide not being that good, Jet is a more complicated case. In fact, I just rewatched my 1-minute coverage of the episode for the 96-minute review/ranking I did of Avatar's first season, and I will admit that I am prone to dismiss this episode as nothing more than a somewhat charming but ultimately pretty juvenile and bland experience. I think part of why I struggle with Jet is that I just can't quite see past the idea of a bunch of kids successfully launching guerrilla attacks on full Fire Nation battalions. It all feels a bit too cartoonish and low stakes, and it makes the Fire Nation, at least in this episode, feel less like a terrifying force and more like your typical Saturday Saturday morning villains, kind of like the Empire in Star Wars Rebels or something. And the point about the war forcing these extreme roles onto young people, don't we already get that through the main cast? You know, the ones who are actually developed. If anything, I feel like seeing there are other kids all over the world already fighting the Fire Nation kind of undercuts the impact of what Team Avatar represents. That said, I do agree there's definitely more going on here thematically than I've previously given the episode credit for, and I do think it's a really solid Sokka episode, one of the first where we start to see just how sharp and capable he really is. But overall, for me at least, Jet still feels emblematic of some of Season 1's broader shortcomings, that slightly more juvenile tone, the less cohesive world building that would really tighten up in the later seasons. The episode with Guru Patik opened my mind wide open as a child. It made me realise at a very young age that if I let my emotions flow through me instead of locking them in one place, that life would be a lot easier to navigate. It taught me self-awareness and self-forgiveness, and how life continues regardless of what you hold on to. It has always stuck with me, and it always will. This is the kind of comment I just love seeing, and this is why Avatar: The Last Airbender is my favourite show of all time. Yes, it is not a flawless piece of art, I don't even think that's possible, but at the end of the day, it's a show that introduced me and countless others to a more, I guess, spiritual way of looking at life. Through its portrayal of young characters finding their way and the wise mentors who guide them, it really does encourage you to think more deeply about yourself, your choices, your mind, and the path that you're on. And specifically that episode, The Guru. Man, I just can't wait to talk about it in my upcoming Book 2 review because it's just filled with so much amazing wisdom. However, I did see this other comment about The Guru. It was a reply to the original one, saying, "Episode should have been called the Eastern Air Temple, that way each of the 4 air temples would have had a titular episode." One of the rare misses of this masterpiece, which is actually kind of a good point. I mean, I like The Guru as a title, but yeah, that balance would have been nice considering balance is kind of what the whole show is about, but oh well. And that, my friends, is going to be it for now. Thank you so much for watching. I will be doing another one of these on The Deserter. That should be out soon. Still working on the Book 2 video as well, but I hope you have a good day, and I'll see you in the next one.